Hi, everyone. Happy Disability Pride Month. My name is Nico Meyering. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a white man with large dark glasses. I've got kind of like bedraggled blonde hair, and I'm wearing a blue shirt seated in front of a purple background. I'm honored to be joined for this interview by my friend Erin. Erin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey guys, it's nice to be here today. Excuse me. It's been a long day. My name is Erin Noon Kay. I'm the CEO and founder of Claiming Disability LLC. We are an organization working to educate, advocate, and empower the disabled community through media projects. You may know me from the Claiming Disability podcast, where I sit down with disabled celebrities and interview them, like Lola Spencer from HBO Max with The Sex Lives of College Girls, Andrew Gurza, some of the big ones, Steve Way from Hulu's Rami. I've been really lucky in the disabled community to sit down with some really cool disabled celebs. I use Identity First Language. Claiming Disability is an organization that creates disability pride and fosters disability culture. So I'm all about Identity First Language, which I'm sure you guys have talked about on this podcast. But of course, the idea of Identity First Language is we say disabled and we say it proudly, and it's not a bad word. I'm a disabled human. I think there's the resistance that exists with Identity First Language is sometimes disabled people don't feel that that's validating language, and they'd rather use person first, people with disabilities. But I am a valid human being. I'm just a disabled human being. I always make that point because Identity First Language is very important to me, and I'd like to see a shift in the community in terms of just primarily using Identity First Language.
Thank you, Erin. This is actually very poignant because I haven't actually covered that point in this video series yet.
Oh, okay, cool. Wow.
So, I mean, there was no better introduction. And I love your shirt. It's some dinosaurs with a caption saying ableism is prehistoric.
Yes.
Very nice. Erin.
Robo T-Rex.
It's
a bionic T-Rex. So I create on my merch line, I create animals who are disabled. This one just happens to have a bionic arm.
Oh, there it is. I see it now.
Cool. They're my disabled critters because I feel like we need more representation of just disabled animals, disabled people, just disability in general, to show that it's not scary.
That is entirely valid. Disability is not deficit. Disability is just difference.
Yeah.
Erin, tell me, what does disability pride mean to you?
What does disability pride mean to me? Well, I always kind of like to break down disability pride, and I'm sure you get this a lot. But I get this question basically every single day. What is disability pride? And disability pride to me is a celebration of our community and our culture, not our symptoms. One of the first things people say in conversation is, why would you ever be proud to be disabled? That's not something to be proud of. And to that, I say, why can't we be proud? I'm 33 years old. I've been disabled my entire life. I have cerebral palsy. I use a walker, which maybe you guys could see in the background, and a wheelchair on occasion. My entire life, I have felt shame surrounding my disability. I did not grow up in a setting where my family was supportive of disability. I was raised like an able-bodied kid, which is really strange for disabled people to say, because if you looked at me and you saw me out in the world, you'd be like, wow, that person is disabled as hell. Like, but when I was a kid, I wasn't raised like that. I was expected to keep up with my siblings, do all my chores, do everything above and beyond with disabilities. So I know people never really acknowledged my disability when I was growing up, because that's just not how my family is. So it's a calling back to yourself, because people are like, well, have you always been this way? And I'm like, no, I didn't start embracing my disability until I was 27 years old, because I always thought that it was a negative thing, because I was told out in the world that I should hide it, that I should mask, that I should look as able-bodied as I could possibly look at any given time. And so it was just recently when I started claiming disability, where I started embracing disability pride, embracing disability culture. And we are a culture. The things that we talk about in terms of accessibility, in terms of workplace discrimination, in terms of the collective experiences we experience as the disabled community, that is culture. And it's something worth celebrating. But again, I want to make the clarification, it's not celebrating your symptoms. And it's okay. And I'm finally so thankful in the community, we're realistically starting to have these conversations surrounding disability pride, where disability pride is not a linear journey. You don't just wake up, do the Mel Robbins, give yourself a high five in the mirror, and you feel like, I'm disabled, I'm pridefully disabled, whatever. Like, that's not how it works. We go through days where we don't like being disabled, where being disabled really sucks, where we grieve the loss of our mobility, where we, where we're upset about inaccessibility and workplace discrimination and the things that we experience as disabled people. That's part of disability pride. Disability pride is a human experience. And the other clarification I want to make about disability pride, I have a whole series that I do on my Instagram. You guys are welcome to check it out. Erin.claimingdisability _ LLC, where I talk about disability pride. And disability pride is body neutrality, because we understand as disabled people that our journeys with our bodies are not linear. So one of the issues with the body positive movement is you just are like, I'm positive about my body and I'm going to ignore any shortcomings that I have. Disability pride is body neutrality, because we understand that loving ourselves truly is a process.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. This is a very comprehensive answer, in fact. And I love what you say about acceptance not being a linear journey and pride also not being a linear journey. There's roundabouts, there's circuitous routes, there's even backtracking. And that's all pretty okay to do. It's not a one size fits all, and it's not an all at once thing either. So we'll also see my dog hop up and try to get in this window as well.
I love that. I love your dog.
Thank you. She loves you too, because she loves everyone. She is a dog.
I like that.
Erin, what is one thing you want non-disabled people to know about disability life?
What is one thing I want non-disabled people to know about disabled life? I'm sure you've interviewed a lot of disabled people who've said this, but just that it's not scary. There is we like to say in the disabled community, or as the infamous Amani Barber from Crutches and Spice says, you're all gonna end up like us someday. Some just sooner than others. And I think because I don't know about you, Nico, but I've definitely had this may I just say, So I'm on TikTok as well. You can look at Erin claiming disability. I talk about the Capitol Crawl. I talk about a lot of disability history. I love disability history. I feel like a huge part of disability pride is just knowing our history. Because I took a Cold War class where we covered, the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, every movement except the disability rights movement. So please, 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 in your DEI, if you're not familiar with that, your diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations, please include disability. The other part, simultaneously, as the Women's March was happening, as the civil rights movement was happening with Martin Luther King, and people moving on buses and things like that. Simultaneously, the disability rights movement was happening with Judy Heumann and trying to pass the Vocational Act of 1973. Like, disability history is history. But it's not scary being a disabled person, and eventually we all end up in the same place. But so I had something funny happen on TikTok the other day where somebody asked me where I got my walker from. And as somebody who has cerebral palsy and has been disabled as hell their entire life, I just find that to be hilarious, because it was not cool to be the disabled kid back in the day, folks. Like, it was not. Like, I'm like, to have people ask me, like, where did you get your wheelchair? Where do you, like, it's like a stylish thing, is like partially amazing, partially just like, it just blows my mind, because, in the 90s, we all got made fun of. Like, we were the people that able-bodied people refused to date and all that stuff. So it's really weird to see this like paradigm shift of like disability acceptance, which I think is like really amazing. But it's definitely strange to see. And I think with able-bodied people, they've always kind of been curious about disability. Otherwise, they wouldn't ask us so many embarrassing questions. So I just ask your questions, be respectful, but also understand that you're not separate. I think what's happening, especially right now in our culture, with the recent overturn of Roe versus Wade, we believe that we're operating separately with these issues, and we're not.
Right.
A reproductive health issue that is impacting the disabled community, which the overturn of Roe versus Wade is going to kill lots and lots of disabled people, because they will not have adequate access to reproductive health care, which I'm 33 years old, and I can honestly say I don't have good access to reproductive health care as a disabled woman, who needs tables to lower, who needs resources. But again, we need to understand that when these issues happen, yes, they impact disabled communities. Yes, they impact, the people in different minority groups, the BIPOC community, but they're impacting everyone. I think it's really funny with the overturn of Roe versus Wade, because I don't know if you remember, Nico, but people were losing their freaking mind when Britney Spears, her dad was like, had a guardianship, conservatorship over her. Everybody lost their freaking shit, excuse me, but like they did, and they were like, free Britney, free Britney, free Britney. And I'm like, yes, free Britney, a wealthy woman of means who has millions of dollars and is essentially a woman of privilege. But free the hundreds of thousands of disabled people who are currently in guardianships or conservatorships in their own state, to the privatization of Medicaid and stuff like that. And so I think it's really interesting, because we were talking about Britney Spears is like this disabled icon. And I was like, yes, but she has means to get out of those conservatorships. There are people I know in Iowa who are my friends who will be in guardianships or conservatorships. Again, if you're not familiar with what a guardianship or a conservatorship is, it's when your parents make decisions for you as a disabled person, financially, with your reproductive health, what jobs you take. This is a very real thing in the disabled community. Yeah, I know people in a lot of conservatorships. And again, this isn't just an issue that impacts a celebrity, it impacts everyone. And especially, I get kind of upset when there's disabled people who are actively celebrating the overturn of Roe versus Wade, because losing our bodily autonomy in any regard is not a good thing. Trust me, a disabled person can tell you this. When you don't have control over your own body, and medical professionals and your parents, and they're in charge of your body, it's very distressing. Sorry, I went on a tangent there.
No, it's all right. It is very unempowering. So if you're not starting from a place of agency or autonomy, how do you get anything else done?
Yes, exactly.
Mhm. Erin, what is one lesson that being disabled has taught you?
That people would rather be dead than be disabled. I
Okay,
mean,
have you gotten that comment?
absolutely.
Okay, I'm really sorry, but I'm also not surprised.
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying, like Amani Barber and Crutches and Spice, she's kind of a big deal in the disabled community. She talks about this concept all the time.
Mhm.
This past year, the CDC, the Director of Disease Control, essentially stated on live television that we didn't need to worry about COVID because the only people who were dying in this global pandemic were the elderly and the disabled. Um,
Yes, yes.
when you have somebody of that high stature and people are like, oh my God, and people were outraged. There were so many TikToks being made about it. And I was like, I hear able-bodied people say this all the time,
Mhm.
frankly. I've been told all my life that they'd rather be dead than be disabled. Yeah, people would just come up and be like, if I looked like you, I would kill myself. And it's very like, it's very odd.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, it's the way we frame disability. And I think that's why you are working so hard as an advocate. I know you're working really hard with your education in Philadelphia, trying to extrapolate on disabled history. We're not really taught that being disabled is okay because
Mhm.
we're actively erasing disabled history. So when you don't see people like yourself, when you don't know that JFK had a disability, when you didn't know that kind of stuff, you're like, or that Marilyn Monroe, the woman who's considered the sexiest woman alive, was
Mhm.
disabled because she had endometriosis and struggled with mental illness. You don't really feel like you have any agency in life because you're like, well, where are these disabled people that I can look up to? But I think you're doing a really good job. I know you're involved with Diversability. It's an amazing company helping a lot of disabled people and kind of having these conversations around disability pride, disability culture, and our history, because preserving our history, I mean, I don't know about you, Nico, I hope not, but the amount of disabled people, when I posted that viral TikTok on the Capitol crawl, that had never seen that footage and have
Mhm.
never even heard of the Capitol crawl. This month is Disability Pride Month because we're celebrating the Americans with Disabilities Act, which
Right?
is 72 years old.
Mhm.
I'm 33. I am old in the Americans with Disabilities Act, the only piece of federal legislation that exists for disabled people. It's the only piece. That's why we celebrate so heavily, because it's federally mandated. And again, I know there's a lot of disabled advocates who have issues with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So do I. We need to do a lot of work, but it's an amazing piece of legislation led by our hometown hero. I'm from Iowa, Senator Tom Harkin,
Mhm.
former Senator Tom Harkin. But we love him around these parts because he ushered in the Americans with Disabilities Act. But again, the Americans with Disabilities Act inherently fails because it's not enforced. There's so many loopholes that exist for businesses, companies, organizations. There was just a case that came up where somebody needed an ASL interpreter for an event, and the Supreme Court ruled that the disabled person wasn't being discriminated against because the organization didn't know they needed an accommodation. So they ruled it incidental discrimination, which is that inherently means we didn't know we needed to provide an accommodation, therefore we weren't being discriminatory.
Right.
And it's like, that's a slippery slope. You could easily argue for any of the businesses that I patron in Iowa that they didn't know that they had to have an accessible entrance. Well, the Americans with Disabilities Act has been around for 32 years. Again, we struggle with the enforcement of it.
We do.
And that's why I think it's cool what you guys are doing, you know, with just really talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's important, and just keep doing it. I lost my train of thought. I'm not used to talking this much. I host my own podcast, so usually I just sit here. I don't talk that much.
That's okay. That's all right. Yeah, it's especially weird because here in Philadelphia, we're the site of one of the first low-cost clinics or no-cost clinics in the nation, right? And we're also the home city of Dr. Benjamin Rush, who is the American father of psychiatry. One of the first people who said, hey, maybe mental illness deserves treatment and compassion rather than just being thrown away. I recently gave a presentation to area high schoolers who didn't know about things like ugly laws or eugenics and all of its ugly manifestations, the 504 sit-ins or anything like that, which is really shocking. Erin, this brings us to our last question. What have you had to unlearn as a result of being disabled?
What have I had to unlearn? I would say what I unlearned as a disabled person is obviously ableism. Now, maybe not obviously, but I have an interesting take on ableism.
Mhm.
I get asked all the time what it is, and inherently it's oppression that exists in a bubble for disabled people. But we are part of a call out culture, right? Where everybody's kind of like, if you don't like this, you're ableist. If you don't like this, you're ableist. If you don't like this, you're ableist. Guys, we are all ableist. We are just actively trying to unlearn that ableism. It's akin to racism. We live in a racist society. So we are all just actively trying to unlearn racism. We're actively trying to unlearn ableism. I think we're a little too quick to be like something is ableist, this is ableist, blah, blah, blah. And again, I'm a disabled advocate that embraces identity first language. I embrace disability lexicon. I embrace, terminology that is not accepted in the disabled community. I embrace words like cripple, gimp, spaz. Again, I have reclaimed these words. I am actively part of the reclamation movement. And when you try to explain this to the disabled community, it often gets, again, like, well, we can take back these words, but nobody else can say them, whatever it is. I understand, guys, and I know that you don't believe me. I don't really care that you don't. Sorry, this is your podcast, not mine. I don't really care if you don't believe me. But when I was growing up, my dad used to call me a worthless cripple like every single day. So cripple was ugly. I was ugly. I was worthless. I wasn't going to amount to anything. And again, that word hurt me for a very, very long time because it was weaponized against me to make me feel very bad about myself as a disabled individual. So I understand the sting that can come from those derogatory slurs, but I also understand when you reclaim something, the feeling you can feel when you hear those words, it doesn't have the same kind of sting. Like, I don't know. Like, that's why I use that kind of language, and I use it heavily. Because at one point, disabled was in that category of words that we couldn't say. And again, you are not allowed to take away a disabled person's autonomy.
That's right.
And I've worked nonprofit and I've worked government, and you and I have a shared AmeriCorps Vista history.
We do.
Yeah, I have been told multiple times as a disabled person not to say certain things about myself or others. And again, these are able-bodied people in able-bodied circles. It's one of the reasons I don't work nonprofit anymore, because I realized nonprofit was benefiting off of disability versus letting us actually into the process, letting us rise through the ranks. I wasn't viewed that way. Even though I was an employee, I was still looked at like a client because I was disabled and I have mental illness. But yeah, we're not listened to in those circles. At least I never have been. And I've always been met with a lot of, this is what you should say, this is what you shouldn't say. And in a world where disabled people don't even have autonomy over their own bodies in some circumstances, no, you're not going to tell us what we can and cannot say. And again, I know there's a lot of debate around language, and that's a good thing. I'm glad that the disabled community is so diverse and we have all these different opinions. I just think it makes it hard to fight the bigger battles, and disabled advocates, we talk a lot about disabled infighting. And whether it's a service or something positive, it's important to have different points of view. If you've met one disabled person like Emily Liddell, the author of Demystifying Disability, if you've met one disabled person, you've met one disabled person.
I love it.
And that's it. And I think that's a hard pill for disabled people to follow or to swallow. Disabled, I do not speak for the entirety of the community. I speak for Erin Noon Kay, the CEO and founder of Claiming Disability, and that's it. And I never claim to speak for the community or on behalf of the community. And that's what we need to understand in terms of advocacy, that every single advocate approaches their advocacy a different way.
Erin, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Thank you so much for all of your words, and especially thank you for your time. I know how busy you are. I know the toll this takes on you, and I'm so honored to have your help with this small project of mine. Where can people find you online? You've said it a few times, but I want to give you one last chance to promote yourself.
Absolutely. As Nico said, you can find me on Threadless. I have amazing disability pride merch. You can check out my Threadless store under Erin Claiming Disability LLC. You can also check out my Instagram. That's probably my biggest platform, Erin.claimingdisability_LLC. I talk about advocacy. I make history videos. I do my own podcast, which I'll probably have this episode on. I do a lot of different things. And you can follow me on TikTok, Erin Claiming Disability LLC. I have a Facebook page, but I don't think people use Facebook very much anymore. And then I have Twitter, Erin Claiming Dis, where you can listen to all my thoughts on various disability related topics.
Thank you so much again for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your night, Erin.
Thank you. I appreciate it.